Okay, thank you. So the recording has started, and I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. My name is Jennifer Howald with DPSST. This is the DPSST Private Security House Bill 2183 Implementation Workgroup on October 29th, 2025 at 1 o'clock. We're meeting here at DPSST as well as remotely through Teams. There's an administrative announcement. Let Tom in. Okay, and with the administrative announcement, 1 second. This is a public meeting subject to public meeting law. This meeting is being digitally recorded and will be posted on the DPSST YouTube webpage. Discussion of the issues will only be conducted by the work group members and DPSST staff. Please be mindful of comments and side conversations. We're going to start with a quick introduction of the work group members and the staff who are present today, just so we can record on the record who is here. So I will start here in the room. We'll go around the room and then we'll signal people online. But again, Jennifer Howell, DPSST Administrative Rules Coordinator.
Crystal Maroney, Learning and Development Specialist 2.
Larry Welty, DPI Security.
Jessica Clausen, DPSST. I do certification eligibility on the criminal justice side.
Susie Herring, DPSST Staff Program Manager.
Krista Hertert, City of Eugene City Hall Operations Manager.
Carissa White, DPSST Staff Compliance Investigator for the Private Security Program.
Larry Crompton, Oregon Beverage Recycling Co-op, and retired law enforcement from Eugene PD.
Okay, so running through those online, I'm just going down the list in alphabetical order. We have Justin.
Yeah, Justin Gates, General Manager, Central Station Monitoring.
Alex.
Yep, Alex Gallagher, Allied Universal Training, TriMet contract.
Tom.
Tom Hath, CYA Security.
Thank you. Eric.
Yeah, Eric Knopp. I'm an armed and unarmed professional, armed and unarmed instructor, EM, was an SM, and a current reserve deputy.
And since we have two Michaels, Michael McNerney.
Michael McNerney, Director of Campus Safety and Emergency Management, University of Portland.
Thank you. Stephen.
Steven Sturman. I am the area manager for North Pacific Security and unarmed instructor for same company.
Okay. Jason.
Jason Mosley, Benton Community College, unarmed security instructor, Cleary coordinating officer.
Thank you. And going back to Mike Brandt. Mike, can you hear us okay? We do have Mike Brandt logged in, and then we'll figure out the logistics for audio for him in a moment. Sometimes, Mike, if you can't hear us and we can't hear you, if you log out and log back in, I'm not sure if you can't hear me, then that doesn't help you. Are you logged? You're not logged in.
No, but I can.
Send a message, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then we had one other staff member join us, Jennifer.
Thank you. So that covers all of our members present and staff present for introductions. The next item on the agenda, a couple of other things first before I get into that. Reminders during discussion, please state your name. And it's not necessarily for the formality of the record, but to help those online. Stating your name.
Now.
So you're good.
Now, okay. So stating your name will help those in the room know who's speaking online, and vice versa, those online know who's speaking in the room. So it's just helpful for the communication. I also wanted to provide a quick recap. So again, House Bill 2183 is requiring DPSST to adopt rules recognizing prior law enforcement experience towards private security certification. And the purpose of this work group is to consider the current practices and make recommendations that will help interpret and identify the 3 parts of the rule that are required within that statute. And that is identifying what the applicant's eligibility requirements are, what basic training courses for private security can be substituted with the prior law enforcement experience, and then how that applicant would demonstrate their knowledge and skills in order to obtain certification as a private security professional. Staff prepared a memo, and it was dated 10/16/25 that includes several discussion items that serve as an outline for the work group. Of course, based on our conversations and additional discussions, we may add additional topics or agenda items as we go. During the first meeting on October 16th, the work group reviewed the eligibility portion of these requirements. And so far, there is consensus for the following as we move forward. And that is acceptable sources of law enforcement experience can come from employment as a police officer, reserve officer, corrections officer, parole and probation officer, or military police officer. As we review each of the private security professional certifications, we can determine if all of these apply to that level of certification or if only certain disciplines apply to a certification. There was also consensus that when we review the alarm monitor certification, we'll consider whether or not telecommunicators and emergency medical dispatchers could be eligible under this statute for that. There was consensus that the experience as an Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission regulatory specialist does not apply, so that would not be included. The work group discussed, and there was consensus that to be eligible, the law enforcement officer must have been employed for at least 2 years, and the employment needs to have been within the last 4 years of their application for private security certification. We discussed making sure that the 4-year timeline looks at active duty to exclude any long periods of leave that may have occurred right before the separation of employments. And we also, the work group determined that, got it, okay. The work group determined that a law enforcement officer is not considered eligible to apply using their prior law enforcement experience if the law enforcement certification was denied, suspended, or revoked, or if it's currently under investigation by DPSST or under investigation by any other agency. So that's the recap from our first meeting. Today, so the second agenda item is review of discussion topics that were carried over from the first meeting. We'll start with the second part of the rule requirements, which is identifying the private security training courses that can be substituted with prior law enforcement experience. So when you're looking at the memo, that goes to page 4, and it starts with question number 6. Again, we're focused on the 4 private security professional certifications: the alarm monitor, the event and entertainment private security professional, unarmed professional, and the armed professional. And the memo lists what the basic training requirements are for each one of those certifications. So as we go through it, let's consider each certification and that basic training one by one and determine if the basic training requirements can be substituted with prior law enforcement experience. And you're welcome to questions and discussion, and I'll turn it over to you all. So if we were to look at the alarm monitor.
I would think somebody with a certification for telecommunications, I think would be fine with an alarm monitor. I think that would be easily transferable.
Mike Brandt, I'm with you guys now. I agree. That should qualify.
Yeah, Justin Gates, I would agree as well.
Jason Wells, I would agree.
And then also looking at the alarm monitor, what about the experience as a police officer, reserve officer, or military police officer?
Steve Sturman again. If they had dispatch experience, I think probably. I'm not that knowledgeable about the alarm monitoring side of things, other than just responding to the alarms.
Justin Gates here, Central Station. I would actually agree there too. My thoughts were, depending on if they had, dispatch experience, I don't know how they would in that sense, but they should have some form of experience in there. So, I mean, I wouldn't fully rule it out, I guess. I would just need to know more of what kind of experience they would have in that aspect.
Okay.
Mike Brandt, what is the class requirement for alarm monitoring? I'm not familiar with that site either.
The topics or the general? So in general, it's 8 hours of classroom instruction. There's an exam, and then there's a 4-hour assessment.
I would think
Content.
kind of like these guys said, if they didn't have prior dispatch experience, then I don't think an 8-hour class is too much to ask.
Yeah, this is Justin again. I would agree with that. Like, that's where I'm at is I don't think it's a huge ask for a 8-hour class on something like that, especially if they have no experience on it. So
There seems to be consensus that if a person is going to be eligible, they need to have dispatch experience for the alarm monitor certification. We also were considering whether or not corrections or parole and probation officers would be able to use their prior law enforcement experience. So how would that apply to alarm monitor?
Justin here again. I would think the same thing that we've been chatting about. I don't think it would be a huge ask to have them just go through that quick, easy training. I think it'd probably be good for them too, just to have that experience.
Mike McNerney, corrections officers will often have more experience with video surveillance systems and similar equipment, but even so, most of them are not going to be bothered by an 8-hour class that covers some stuff they already know.
Mike Brandt. I've actually got a couple friends that have been in corrections for quite a while, and it does depend on if you work the control room. A lot of them just work the yard and work tiers, and they're not ever in the control room because they work on a bid system. So I would say to cover our basis, it would be the same rule. If you haven't had actual dispatch experience, then you would need to go through the class.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or considerations about alarm monitor before I move on to event and entertainment? So the event and entertainment private security professional is an online self-paced training course and exam. And then my understanding is that a telecommunicator emergency medical dispatcher would not be eligible for event and entertainment unarmed or armed based on the first meeting. Okay. So in thinking of the event and entertainment, we'll take them by groups again. Police officer, reserve officer, and military police officer.
I think they would be, Steve Sturman again, I think they would be fully, if they're going to be able to go through just like a refresher with private security, I think that for event and entertainment, I think they'd be fine without having to take any additional training. It's a self-paced course. It's not that big of an issue, I don't think.
Mike Brandt, agreed.
Eric Knopp, how long does that training take? Does anybody know? I haven't been there yet.
Are there any staff that have an estimated amount of time for that one?
It's self-paced, so it could be 2 to 4 hours, depending upon the individual.
Tom Heft, it's for most people that's never taken it, it's about 3 hours. It's not a hard class to take. So
Thank you, Tom.
And that
Jake-
training that's sorry,
I'm
Eric
sorry,
Knopp
go
again.
ahead.
Is that training free? You can just take the class online.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any harm in requiring people to go through that. Especially if that's the only level of certification they're gonna get. That's a pretty low bar, I think.
Yeah, I know the Jason Wells event and entertainment, they do have to deal with a lot that security officers have to deal with, but even just a small refresher so they, remember how to, do reports and other things like that wouldn't hurt at all. I don't know if they'd have to go through an entire class, but a refresher at least.
So I'm having a hard time discerning whether or not folks are in favor of requiring completion of the basic training course for event and entertainment, or allowing the prior law enforcement experience to be substituted for that. And I know people are mentioning, what they can take in place of it, and we're going to discuss that next. But for the baseline of whether or not, for lack of other words, we're going to waive that basic training requirement.
So, Mike McNerney, I would actually advocate, because the event security training is a very niche kind of function for security and is very specific to that context. I think that it may be prudent to just have even law enforcement veterans run through that 3-hour online course very quickly and familiarize themselves with those nuances.
Okay. Thank you. So I have that from Eric and Michael.
Alex
Staff
Gallagher
member.
here agrees with that as well.
Great. Okay.
And very well, T, I agree.
Okay. All right. Thank
Mike
you.
Brandt, I agree.
Okay, then, so if we were to also consider that for corrections and parole and probation officers, they would also be required to complete the event and entertainment. Prior law enforcement experience would not substitute for events and entertainment. Okay. Okay. All right, the next one, I know you all have been waiting for this, the unarmed private security professional. So when you're looking at the unarmed private security professional, they're required to have 14 hours of the unarmed basic classroom instruction. With that, there's an exam and there are assessments. So again, starting to just discuss with that first category that are kind of lumped together, the police officer, reserve officer, and military police officer. With their prior law enforcement experience, their minimum of 2 years of employment within the past 4 years, be eligible to be substituted for any or all of those basic training requirements.
Steve Sturman here. I would like to see him at least do the 4-hour refresher. I think their training is superior, but there's a couple of things that are a little bit different as far as law enforcement versus private security culture wise that I think the would be beneficial to former law enforcement. I don't think that she'd have to take the full, I don't really think they need to take the full 14 hours though.
Frank has his hand up.
Go ahead, Mike. Thanks, Stephen.
I kind of agree with Stephen. Also, as prior law enforcement, I think that some of the shocker for me was coming from law enforcement and how much you are not allowed to do as security. And so I think they need at least a 4-hour refresher, so that they can understand you no longer have the power to do these things.
Eric Knopp, I agree with both of them.
Alex Gallagher agrees as well.
Larry Welty agrees.
Christopher Hurd agrees.
Mike McNerney agrees.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
So when we're referring to the 4-hour refresher course, are we referring to specifically the content within that course meeting what you're wanting it to do? Like what's covered in that course presently would do what you're saying? Or, yes, I just want to be clear on that.
We're going to get to that.
Okay, perfect. Sorry.
So we'll get to that in the next item.
Okay.
So thank you. Sorry, I didn't know what your question was.
That's okay. So that was general consensus that police officers, reserve officers, and military police officers are eligible to use their prior law enforcement experience to, again, basically waive the full 14 hours of class, and we'll then decide what the requirement is on the other end next. Okay. That was a yes. So our other categories were corrections officers and parole and probation officers for unarmed.
Mike Brandt. I would agree that they could probably get through with a refresher. I know they too go through quite a bit of that in the academy and that, and so I think they would be good with the refresher as well.
Steve Sturman, I agree.
Eric Knopp, I agree.
Mike McNerney, I agree.
Alex Gallagher agreeing.
Right. All right. So we have a general consensus that corrections officers and parole and probation officers could apply and use their prior law enforcement experience for the unarmed private security professional certification. Okay. So the fourth certification is the armed private security professional. Could a police officer, reserve officer, or military police officer use their prior law enforcement experience for the armed professional certification? Again, that's 24 hours of basic firearms instruction, includes written examination, safe gun handling test, and marksmanship qualification.
Larry Welty, I would be in favor of them taking that course.
The course in its entirety, the 24 hours?
Yes.
Eric Knopp, I would not agree with that. Not for the full 24 for police.
Sorry, can you state your name?
Eric Knopp.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I didn't catch that. And Michael Brandt?
I would agree with Eric. I think the refresher and the accuracy test would be enough. Because as law enforcement, I qualified every quarter. And it was a lot tighter qualification. I was required to shoot at 25 yards, which is not currently even required for private security. So I would think if they met the other requirements that we had talked about, as far as their law enforcement service, then I would think that a refresher would be enough.
Wow, that's a bit of a change. I thought that started at 30 yards. Steve Sturman, I'm with Mike and Eric on this. I think the refresher is sufficient. Their shooting qualifications standards are more tight than ours.
Mike McNerney, I would just add that I believe this is the piece that last time around we were discussing that it is a perishable skill, so there is kind of a time component to this. If we're talking about somebody who has a current active qualification through their law enforcement experience, then great. And then if it's somebody who, 10, 15 years later is like, hey, let's do some security work, we want to probably put them through something a little more rigorous.
Yeah, I believe that was correct. I think
Mike Brent, I think wasn't that when we discussed that it had to be within the last 2 years or something like that we okayed it?
I think that was said last year, within the last 12 months.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, you're right. I think it was the last year because we said if it was longer than the 1 year required by private security, then they had to go through the whole course.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
Larry
correct.
Welty, that's exactly where I was going based on the conversation we had at the last meeting.
Larry Crompton, would you take into consideration if they qualify each year for the HR 218? If they're outside of that window?
I would say not if they're outside a year.
Eric Knopf, just a point of clarification, because as we're talking about how shooting is a perishable skill, and I'm a firearms instructor, and like I totally understand that, but we're talking about whether or not they're required to take the full 24-hour course, and I think the general consensus here is at a minimum they have to take the 4-hour armed refresher course, which requires them to shoot a qual. So if they have to shoot a qual one way or another, then I guess my question would be, what difference does it make? Whether it's been 4 years or 10 years, and we already kind of set the 4-year timeline, and I'm totally okay with that. But yes, they're going to have to shoot their qual annually to be in compliance with DPSST's armed security requirements anyway. So however long it's been, HR 218 or otherwise, I don't know that it makes a difference. Either they can show up and shoot the qual or they can't.
Well, I hear a lot of talk about the qual. What about the rest of the course?
Well, the rest of the course would be the classroom portion, and they recertify that as part of the 2-year biennial as well. But the qualifications, the firearms qualification, it's the shooting part, and that's based on the actual physical skill that you have to have that is a perishable one they're talking about. The classroom training, we pretty much, I think, set that at 2 years.
What I was referring to is you guys keep talking about what the qual requirement, but if you want the refresher course, that's 4 hours versus 24 hours, of course.
Well, the 24
and you feel that the 4-hour would be sufficient for them is basically what I'm asking.
Yes, and the 24 hours isn't just the classroom time. That also includes, if I remember correctly, I believe it's 8 hours on the range, and the actual classroom component is 16 hours in the classroom. Maybe Eric, you can correct me on this because I'm not a the armed instructor. I'm just an unarmed instructor. But the unarmed portion is a 14-hour course in the classroom, and the armed component, if I remember correctly, is 16 hours in the classroom and 8 hours on the range for the full class.
Yeah, that's usually how most instructors do it. Is 2 days classroom and then 1 day on the range, or at least practical skills testing.
Okay, so Jennifer here, and so the The general question right now is whether or not that experience as police officer, reserve officer, or military officer can be substituted for that full 24-hour process. And then in part of the discussion, there's been, yes, but as long as they've last qualified within a shorter amount of time than that 4 hours. So right now, based on consensus, we could look at an applicant and say, you 3.5 years ago, you were employed as a police officer, and you can use that experience to apply for your unarmed. Can they also use that for the armed? Or are you discussing recommending a shorter time period when applying for armed? And you've talked about qualifications. You've talked about HR 218, which is a demonstration of a qualification.
Sorry, Crompton. What type of a qualification do they have? Is it a combat course or is it just a?
What is the qualification for the armed private security professional?
Yes.
I have to defer to our experts.
Crystal Maroney, learning development specialist. So the current qualification is the PQC 1 for armed, but what the content of the qual is likely to change or can change over time. So we shouldn't like build it around what it is currently. It currently is, if you're not familiar with PQC 1, you're at varying, I can pull it up. You start at
15.
15.
Eric, now if I can quote it to you if you like.
Yeah.
The armed course of fire is 25 rounds from 10 yards and in. That's the current armed course of fire. It is not the PQC 1. It's a separate course of fire.
Sorry, my mistake.
That's okay.
So it's just for an accuracy. It has nothing to do with safety and cover or anything like that.
And to shoot.
It's just a point and shoot.
Stage 1 is shot from behind cover. Stage 2 is drawn fire 2 rounds at 7 yards in 4 seconds. Stage 3 is from 5 yards. You draw fire 2, reload fire 6, and then you step to the 3-yard line. You draw and you fire 3 rounds right hand only. Transition 3 rounds left hand only, and then the final stage is your final 2 rounds, and it's about 1 yard. 1.5 to 2 yards, and then you draw and fire your last 2 rounds using a close quarters firing technique.
So it's identical to the HR 218 requirements annually.
I haven't shot HR 218 because I'm not retired. I thought HR 218 required 25 yards, but I haven't shot it, so I don't know.
And Jennifer, for the record, I would have to research it, but HR 218, the qualification course may be at the discretion of the agency who's administering it.
I believe that's correct.
So I guess what I would say is it's difficult because it feels like we're comparing the totality of the courses, where I think that the reality is, we've said, even with the unarmed course, that it's supplanting a lot of the classroom material. We're still having these folks go through a refresher. I think the same thing is applicable to the armed course, but we're not using it to excuse them from firearms qualification as much as reducing the classroom time again to a manageable amount that doesn't repeat content that they're already extremely well versed in because of their experience. So I would say, yeah, that should be the same for both cases. Like if it's 3.5 years and somebody's been a law enforcement officer and we're saying that's enough to get you out of 10 of the hours of classroom instruction for unarmed, and the armed course is 16 hours, then let's get them out of that 10 to 12 hours of instruction on that side too. That makes sense to me.
Steve Sturman, and yeah, I would agree with Mike McNerney on this. The amount of instruction, classroom instruction that a law enforcement officer has regarding lethal force, as opposed to an armed security officer, is undoubtedly orders of magnitude more. And I don't see a point in making them repeat the entire 16 hours classroom segment if they're within 4 years of their law enforcement career. But I am going to hold fast on that 1 year requirement as for the armed shooting, the shooting portion of the qualification. They need to have that within a year.
And Larry Welty, I think we should, for consistency purposes, we need to look at the current requirement from DPSST for that qualification. And it's my understanding there may be some revision to that
At some point.
at some point. But for now, I think, because as we discussed, it depends on which agency that you're doing the HR. And so you don't know how much time is spent or what the range is, distance is, or whatever. So
Must be a set minimum though for the requirements for the HR 218. And if the set minimum is equal to what they're going through for armed security and they do it every year, then I don't see the difference.
I just don't know if they're identical. So
yeah.
Okay.
I think I agree. I somewhat agree with Eric. Like he said, you know, it really doesn't matter. It all comes down to, can they pass a qual or not? You know, I mean, if they can pass it, they can pass it. If they can't, they can't. Time wise, classroom wise, law enforcement was way above what we're getting out of private security, both in safety and in Oregon statutes and this and that. And so I think the classroom doesn't need to be that much. And then, like Eric said, either you pass the qual or you don't. It's just that simple. I think we went with 4 years before because that's how long private security would go. I think they said before you had to totally recert.
Yes.
I think is why we set that four-year term. And I don't know why we would make that any shorter for law enforcement. I would say just keep it consistent because again, the bottom line is, can you pass the qual or you can't?
Well, I think we agreed on that 4 year number just so we could keep it consistent.
Eric Knopp, I think there was also conversations about DPSST basic police certifications expiring after 4 years, which was also a contributing factor. I think that the question we're dealing with right now is whether or not if they've served in a police capacity in the last 4 or as long as it's not been longer than 4 years, can they waive the full 24-hour requirement? And then we get to decide what that waive looks like, what training they're required to complete. And I would say yes, if you've been certified, you know, up to 4 years prior, then you should not have to take the full 24-hour course.
Mike Brandt agreed.
Mike McNerney
yeah,
agreed.
Larry Welty, I agree too.
Steven Sturman agreed.
Jason also agree.
Thank you. So far, I've heard consensus. Is there any final discussion on requiring the full 24-hour course for police officer, military police officer, or reserve officer?
Tom Heft here. What does the other states require for qualifications and stuff? Does anybody know?
That would take a lot of.
Well, Crystal Maroney, the current implemented, they're called assessments now. There's 5 5 different assessments that police are required to pass, and that's been in place for about 2 years now.
So it's
Um,
pretty much same across the board, no matter if you're a cop in New York or Oregon, either one.
Oh, not for the state of Oregon, for here at the DPSST. Did I understand that question correctly?
I would probably say that we don't have data on what's required for police officer qualifications and firearms training in other states. Yeah.
Mike McNerney, but I would argue that again takes us to that point where we say we're waiving the larger class. That doesn't mean we're waiving all class and all firearm training. And so if they're shooting a qualification as a refresher, if we let them skip the base class and go straight to the refresher, if they're from a state that, you know, I don't know, LA County has a real bad track record with hitting things. So if they come up and want to do security up here, we'll have them shoot a qual. And if they can't make it, they can't make it. So
Steve Sturman here. I think we discussed at the last session. If they don't meet Oregon's requirements, I don't understand why we would worry about what other states are requiring if their requirements do not meet the minimum standards that the state of Oregon requires. And I think that's what we were all in agreement on, is they have to meet, for law enforcement from outside of Oregon, that they have to meet the basic standards the state of Oregon requires before we will consider that as equivalent to law enforcement training in the state of Oregon.
Very wealthy, and that's a conversation I recall also.
Okay. All right. So far we have consensus that a police officer, reserve officer, or military police officer could use their prior law enforcement experience to apply for armed, waiving the full basic, and then we'll figure out what's required next. Our other 2 categories for review were corrections officers and parole and probation officers, and whether or not they could use that prior law enforcement experience to apply for armed.
Larry Crompton, I don't believe they're required to qualify and go through the same training that normal police officers do. I worked with a lot of P&P officers, and most of them didn't even carry guns. So I would say they should have to do the full thing.
Mike Brandt, like I said, I have a couple friends that have been in corrections for a while. They do have to qual. They have an annual qual just like everybody else.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are we talking about parole and probation, or are we talking about corrections officers, because they're different animals?
They're both open for discussion to determine what the recommendation is. And I would probably caution that, or not caution, but give background that the basic training requirement for a corrections officer in firearms and a parole and probation officer with a firearm is not the same number of training hours that a police officer receives for basic. What happens after academy and they go back to their agency is all under that agency's discretion. So how frequently they qualify, how much ongoing training they have is the discretion of that agency.
Oh, okay.
Eric Knopf,
And so depending upon the employer, they may or not have firearms duties on a regular basis. May or may not. Okay,
Which
Eric,
means they
you
may
were
or may
about to
not.
speak?
Yeah, Eric Knopf, can someone from DPSST tell us what the basic amount of range hours are for corrections and parole and probation currently?
Jessica, for the record, I think it's 26 hours firearms training.
Or corrections officers. Mhm. And then there's an armed parole and probation course that's not a full 2 weeks, but it also involves additional time in addition to the range and classroom with that. There are other topics with it too, right?
I don't know the amount of hours, but it is more than corrections on the range itself.
Yeah.
For range time.
Jessica, for the record, I just wanted to add too, for out-of-state corrections. So we, I'm on the criminal justice side, so we'll review out-of-state corrections officers, parole and probation officers, police officers, and comparing basic curriculum sometimes from out of state. We have noticed corrections specifically from California or Washington do not have firearms within their basic. They might have it as supplemental additional training, but I just wanted to mention that too, is when we're comparing, sometimes we'll approve them for the condensed course, but then say, you need to get plugged in to this additional firearms course to supplement that gap. So I just wanted to mention that.
So I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. Steve Sturman again. So corrections, parole and probation do not have a specified annual, or the DPSST is not specified an annual recertification for or minimum standard for ongoing. It's just the initial certification. Is that correct?
Corrections.
Jessica, for the record, they do have maintenance requirements. Yes. So once they are certified, they have 8 hours of firearms annual training they have to do every year, 1 hour of ethics every year, and then 84 hours of training within a 3-year period. So, but we're just identifying the annual 8-year every year. And then most of the time they're going to do a lot more than that, but that's what we're looking at for me.
And this is Jennifer. I do want to add to that statement that the 8 hours is any combination of firearms or use of force. So it would not have to include if that particular agency, so as mentioned before, not every parole and probation officer is an armed parole and probation officer. Not every corrections officer is assigned active firearms job duty responsibilities. So depending upon that agency, it could be firearms training or it could be use of force training in that 8 hours of ongoing maintenance annually.
Okay, thank
There
you.
was a hand up from Mike Brandt.
Yeah, with all of that said and the obvious confusion that would cause to try to decide if somebody was or wasn't or whatever, I just say no. Corrections does a full 24. And that,
I agree.
And that'll end that.
It could be 25 years since they had any training. If they worked a 25-year career and they only had it in the beginning and it wasn't required.
Yeah, it's Steven Sturman. I agree with that.
I mean, we've already given them a break on the unarmed. I don't think firearms are going to get a pass on that one. Sorry, Mike Brandt.
Jason Wells, I concur on that.
Crystal, for the record, when we say corrections, are we talking about DOC as well, or strictly? Okay, since they're two different.
So yes, I would say, this is Jennifer, I would say yes, it's all of the corrections officers, whether they're working for DOC or whether they're working for the county sheriff's office, we issue the same certification. So do that same process. And I think that's part of the disparity between who's required to do what on the two ends of the spectrum.
Still have something to say, Krista.
Oh, Krista, I just was saying that I agree.
So far I've heard consensus that a corrections officer and parole and probation officer experience would not substitute for the armed requirements. Okay. So we've made it kind of through that matrix, and the next phase would be looking at each of those certifications and determining what the minimum requirements would be. Is there any other discussion that we need to tie up before I move on to that one? Okay, no lingering questions, confusion. All right, thank you. If we looked to question number 8, we're moving into the area where we're trying to identify what requirements are going to be necessary to demonstrate knowledge or skills necessary for a private security professional certification. So essentially, if we're waiving the full basic training requirement, what are we going to require that they complete in order to successfully demonstrate. I do want to point out specifically the introduced version of House Bill 2183 and the supporters of the bill, whenever they were asking for this through the legislative process, they were going the path of the refresher course and examination as the path to obtaining certification if you had prior law enforcement experience. And when we sent out the recruitments for the work group that you all responded to that recruitment, we had used similar language in that recruitment process about the refresher and the examination as a consideration. But what I want to make sure that you all know before you start your conversations about what should be required is you are not limited to that as the path or the concept. So you are welcome to discuss whatever you think needs to be demonstrated by these applicants in order to show that they are eligible for the certification. We did not want to limit you to the idea of the refresher course and examinations. So, I don't, Susie, did you want to add anything to that, or
Maybe just rereading the language from the bill?
Sure. Sure.
Just to clarify the difference, but yeah, that was on me.
So the bill, the enrolled version of the bill says that the rules will identify the requirements for demonstrating the knowledge or skills necessary for certification as a private security professional. So it's really kind of quite broad. It gives you a full range of things that you can consider. Jason, you have your hand up.
Yes, I believe that if we're questionable on their actual skill level, we should be able to give them the shorter 20 answer quiz as a challenge. And if they pass that, I believe that would demonstrate enough skill that they would only, maybe need to go through the 4-hour refresher instead of, the whole thing. Because goodness gracious, if they can pass the 20 question quiz as a challenge, they should be more than qualified to just have a 4-hour refresher course and be good to go.
So, go ahead, Susie.
Well, I was just going to add to that. One, I'm assuming he was talking, Jason, you were talking about the armed course. Is that correct?
I was actually referring to armed or unarmed, either way.
Okay. Right. And just the specific language of talking about 20 questions, curriculum is going to change throughout its time. We're obviously looking at the revision of the ARM curriculum, so I don't want to limit it to a specific amount of, because they're taking this exam maybe rather than a 20 question exam. I understand that that's what it is today, but those things will evolve. So I want you all to be comfortable with the decisions that you're making in this work group, that it represents as we move forward what that exam may look like, or what the assessments or the qualification, just consideration of that.
Steven Sturman.
So we'd be looking at, we've already talked about the refresher course and passing the exam. So isn't that where we're at right now?
In general, yes. This is Jennifer. We're broadly at the space where we can, where you all get to discuss, is it going to be the requirement that a person who's applying using their prior law enforcement experience, we've already determined that they're eligible, they have 2 years, it's within 4 years, their certification has not been denied, suspended, or revoked, so they're an eligible candidate. What are they going to be required to complete training wise or demonstration wise? And so it has been kind of put out there as the refresher courses and their examinations. It's been broadly discussed by the work group members already for both unarmed and armed. That's been a concept that's been.
Wouldn't that be the demonstration then?
It includes the demonstration, yes, because the exam in the unarmed is the demonstration of the knowledge, right? And then in the concept of the armed, you have the examination and you have even the refresher has safe gun handling and has the qualification component. So those are demonstrations of skills. So it's just a matter of, is that what the work group finds is the appropriate, or is there anything else that needs to be considered in addition to that? Someone spoke to challenging training just by taking the exam. So that would, the challenge process would, I don't know if you meant that if you could take the test, you wouldn't have to take the training hours. I'm not sure if that was the component in that or not, but there's a couple hands up, and let's go around. Can I do that? And then
I didn't have anything yet.
oh, okay. All right. So Stephen.
Yeah, one of the things that I talked about, I think at the last session, there were two key areas that I really thought that law enforcement and private security where the training needed to be covered and under the refresher. And those two areas are really, maybe even three, are searches, searches of private citizens and they're coming in or leaving a facility. And I believe was citizens arrest versus law enforcement arrest, the probable cause aspect. Those two elements are the two biggest sticking points that I've seen in working with previous law enforcement officers and the time that I've been working as a security officer. So those two elements are covered in the refresher course. So I think the refresher would actually be sufficient. I think as it stands right now anyway.
Tom?
I agree with what Steven said there as well. But also the other part that I've seen with past law enforcement working for me is searches. They go above and beyond what we're supposed to do on searches as well. And also, if they can't pass this refresher, I think they ought to have to take the full course again. If they fail it, then they should have to start completely over at that point.
Yes.
You shouldn't be able to remediate anything just automatically. If you fail, you got to take it all.
Alex Gallagher agrees with that last part there.
Eric Knopp, are we saying the zero remediation? They get one test question wrong and like we don't even hold students to that standard.
I would say that if they fail based on what the requirements are, and I think you can miss 3 questions before you can't remediate on the refresher.
It's below 85%. If they score less than 85%, then they fail.
Yeah, and being a 20-question test, that would be 3 questions. So yeah.
I think pretty much a consensus of everybody right now. This is Mike Brandt, by the way. I think the consensus of everybody right now is a 4-hour refresher, and then the test exams for both armed and unarmed, and the qual for armed. I think is kind of pretty much a standard we're all agreeing to.
Any other? Crystal, for the record, just a question. Are we trying to identify training or skills that should be required in each section? Okay, so we're trying to talk about the specific skills, not.
We have the work group has the ability to identify specific things. In general, so far, it's looking like a recommendation that by completing the refresher training courses and their examinations, and for the armed, the qualification that goes with it, that those would cover all of the skills demonstrations that they're looking for.
But we have we not identified the skills to be demonstrated, or is that another time?
The 2 big skills I think that we needed to identify as far as the unarmed portion, this is Steve Sturman again, are covered in the refresher course, but those were arrests and searches are the 2 big ones that we were looking at for unarmed. As far as armed, I'm not currently an armed officer, haven't been in over 15 years, so I'll trust Eric on this one.
Yeah, Eric Knopp here. I think a lot of the basic security stuff is covered in the unarmed curriculum, which I believe is why it exists the way it does. The armed curriculum is very heavy on, obviously, use of deadly force. There's a whole section on cleaning and maintenance of your firearms, and then you've got the practical skills test, and there's talks about shooting in low light settings and using flashlights. Like, there's more, I think, tactics in the armed course than there is in the unarmed. So I think just based on that, I feel like the majority of the armed curriculum is just use of force law, and then whether or not you can shoot straight. And so the armed refresher course, that 4 hours, dives into the use of force law aspect of it, firearm safety rules, safe gun handling, safe storage, and that sort of thing. So I think the 4 hour refresher would do an equally similar job for those with the police reserve and military police backgrounds.
And no, Susie Harrington for the record, to Crystal's point, I think at some point we should identify some skills as the group is discussing, because as the curriculum evolves, again, kind of referring back to my comment about the exam, if we identify what those skills are that we want to make sure that these individuals that are essentially being waived into this group, if the refresher courses change throughout the time, we need to make sure that those skills are still included in that refresher course if they're saying that that's going to be accepted. Not to say that it wouldn't, I mean, in reality, but you just don't know what those components may look like years down the road. So I think it might be helpful. Obviously, they've identified 3 of those that I've heard already. And then just making sure that if those are the skills, that they're included in all of the refresher courses. And if down the road there's something that is not there, that it gets added, or the equivalation of elaborating on that, what that might look like.
So then the skills that have been discussed so far have been what the private security professionals' authorities are with regard to search and citizens arrest, and then broadly the use of force, which is part of unarmed as well as armed. Okay. So those authorities: search, citizens arrest, and use of force.
Yes.
I like a check and balance just to make sure that we're doing that.
Any additional skills or knowledge that we need to capture so that we can ensure that they're part of the refresher, or if things change, to reassess?
Mike Brandt. I think some of that is going to be really hard to do. Society is constantly evolving, as we're seeing. And I think law enforcement as well as private security is going to be adjusting accordingly. And so I think no matter what changes are made, I kind of believe they're going to be made in both programs as well. And so I think if the big thing with law enforcement is that we just have to have officers understand what not to do. And I think that's going to be covered regardless of what other changes we make.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions?
Eric Knapp, I agree with that. On the armed side, I would say the skills we want to see demonstrated would be firearm safety, safe gun handling, and obviously the qualification course, if we're making a list to be passed around for years to come.
Mike Brandt, agreed.
Steven Sturman, agreed.
Jason Wells, agreed.
Thank you. Okay, so then we've identified some of the skills, and right now there was consensus expressed that the unarmed refresher course and examination would be the general requirement to obtain unarmed certification for these eligible applicants. And that was across all police officer, reserve officer, military, corrections, and parole and probation. Armed is limited to police officer, reserve officer, military police officer. And again, based on the skills identified, the current 4-hour armed refresher course, its examination, and its qualification. Any other
Mike Brandt.
additions?
Mike Brandt, agreed.
Okay.
Eric Knapp, agreed.
All right. So we've captured and confirmed that consensus. So you started down the next, I don't want to forget the alarm monitor, telecommunicator, dispatcher conversation. There was the consideration of allowing the telecommunicator dispatchers to obtain alarm monitor certification. What would that requirement look like?
What's their current requirement?
For alarm monitors?
Mm-hmm. Or
The
for current,
full, sure,
current, I would say dispatchers.
Okay. Their current training hours as a
Yeah.
dispatcher?
Yeah.
Jessica, for the record, it's 116 hours, 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's good.
What's the requirement for alarm monitor?
The
Didn't we say that
alarm-
was 8?
The basic course is 8 hours, examination, and 4-hour assessment. And then the refresher requirement is a 4-hour refresher with examination.
Yeah, and that's every 2 years.
Correct. For the alarm monitor.
Yeah. So sorry, back to your original question. What was your original question? Should a dispatcher be qualified as an alarm operator?
Yes. So up to this point, the work group is considering allowing a dispatcher, so someone who is that telecommunicator or emergency medical dispatcher on the law enforcement side, apply for the alarm monitor certification. With the potential to waive that 8 hours of classroom, examine 4 hours in lieu of taking something else. So similar to what you've done with the unarmed and the armed, what would they be required to take if all the basic 8 hours were waived?
Yeah,
This
Mike
is-
Brandt. I would agree with exactly what we did with the law enforcement side. If you have dispatchers, they've got previous experience, they can do a refresher and assessment.
Krista? Yeah, this is Krista. That's what I was going to say. That seems perfectly appropriate.
Justin, I would
Right.
agree.
What exactly do they teach for alarms? What's required?
What is the content of the alarm monitor course?
Yeah. What does their curriculum entail?
Got an ethics and professionalism course or component, industry overview, a system overview, station procedures, the basic computers, signals, communication, control panels, basically everything they're going to need to know to be successful in their role. And then the refresher course is basically just paring that down to an overview of each of those same comments.
That might
So
not say
basically, she
definitely
could tell you, but it would take
dispatchers.
8 hours.
Right? Good day.
Sorry, Larry, what were you saying?
Say definitely accepting the dispatchers.
With the 4 hour?
Yeah, have them do a 4-hour.
Okay.
Steve Sturman, I would definitely agree.
Justin, thoughts?
Yeah, no,
Justin's all-
I agreed with all that. I thought that was
Okay.
good. Yep.
All right. Okay.
Jennifer, Jessica, for the record, just a question. For private ambulance emergency medical dispatchers that only have EMD certification for the 24 hours, I just want to know if are they including those in this dispatcher discussion? That if they only had emergency medical dispatcher certification or experience, that was 24 hours of training, or just the 116 hours telecommunications for people that have both. I just wanted to add.
That's a good question. It's not a level that we went down to. So this is Jennifer. What Jessica is asking is there are two certifications. There's a telecommunicator certification. That's the full 116 training hours, 3 weeks. There is an emergency medical dispatcher certification. We have a handful of individuals in Oregon who only hold the emergency medical dispatcher. They don't hold, usually it's a dual certification where you hold both. If you're a telecommunicator, you're an emergency medical dispatcher as well. So we have 3 buckets. We have both disciplines. We have telecommunicator only, and we have emergency medical dispatcher only. And those emergency medical dispatcher only are working for private ambulance companies. And that training is, you said 24, it's not 32?
Well, our minimum requirement is 24, but
Okay.
a lot of them do the APCO, which is 32 hours.
And emergency medical dispatcher focuses on receiving and handling those emergency calls and then delivering the
First aid.
the first
Life-saving.
yeah, life-saving responses.
Versus, yeah.
I think both of them are, I mean, not equally applicable, but I think that the 24-hour plus work experience is just as valid as the person who has a broader experience in terms of the alarm monitoring, because the alarm monitoring is not really dispatching. It's just some transferable skills. So if you've got the transferable skills from 24 hours of training or 111 hours of training, you have the transferable skills. I would advocate both of them applying.
Mike
This is
Brand
Justin.
agreed.
Yeah, Justin, agree.
Steve Sturman, I definitely agree.
Eric Knapp, I agree as well.
Krista Herder, I have a question. As far as the alarm monitor refresher, is that required in person? I don't, is it,
It can
can
be,
you tell me more?
it can be a remote training or an in-person.
Okay.
And then, so just as we did for the unarmed and the armed, we had a discussion on identifying what the necessary skills were that needed to be covered in training for the alarm monitors. I mean, for those, are there any that you would specifically call out now as the skills that we need to ensure get carried forward for the telecommunicators applying for an alarm monitor certification?
I think
This
we
is
have
Justin.
somebody.
Oh,
Go ahead, Justin. No, I
was
think
just
you're the
gonna
one.
say,
I think you're the one. I think you're the one I'm talking about. So go ahead.
Yeah, I don't, I can't think of any specific skills off the top of my head. I mean, I think if you've had 24-hour training and you're doing dispatching, it's going to be pretty easy to roll over and do the operator portion of things. And to be honest, most of our stuff is handled through software anyway, so it's guiding operators regardless. So yeah, I can't think of anything specific that would need to be called out.
Follow up, when you were
Yeah.
asking on, did you mean it was the refresher course online, like the event and entertainment?
Yes, that's exactly what I meant.
That's what I
Yeah.
thought. So no, it's not. It's definitely instructor led. Yeah, either remotely, through Teams or Zoom or in a classroom.
So we have a few more minutes left. So the one question is, what is required for successful completion of these courses? So we've talked about allowing for the dispatchers applying for alarm monitor and the law enforcement officers applying for unarmed, and the police reserve and military police applying for armed, going through that refresher process. What is the minimum standard for their successful demonstration? And someone was brought up the component of if you hit that fail mark, there's no, if you fail the course, you would retake the full basic in its entirety. And I want to capture that as part of the discussion. And then there was a comment or a beginning discussion on what to do about remediation. I just want to follow up on that.
Eric Knopp, I
So-
think for simplicity's sake, I would say we should follow the rules for remediation for the refresher courses. And I believe at some point with both refreshers, if you fall below, you have to take the class all over again. I haven't had that happen as an instructor yet. So if someone knows different, please let me know.
That's correct.
Tom?
That's my standard as well. If they're above 85, I'll remediate the missed questions. If they're below 85, then there's no need for remediation. They need to take the entire exam again. And my personal opinion is it doesn't really matter whether they're prior law enforcement or military or dispatcher or whatever they are. If you don't pass the assessment, you don't pass the assessment. Same for everyone.
Tom?
I I agree with the remediation up to 85%, but if they fail it, just totally fail it, they should have to go through all the training. They shouldn't be able to just redo the refresher part again. We're already giving them a
Mike
big
Brannigan,
break by letting them do this.
Thank you. And Stephen, you have your hand up.
Steve Sturman, yeah, I actually concur with Tom and Mike and Eric. I mean, if you hit 80, if you're below that 85% on the refresher, you have to retake the entire class over, and retake the test.
So current remediation practices, standards apply. If you reach the failure mark, instead of retaking the refresher course, you would go back and you would take the full basic of whatever class it is that you failed. Okay, so I do want to, I want to specifically address the qualification for the armed and if that has any different application. So if you, what happens if you currently fail qualification?
3 attempts in 1 day.
Mhm.
And if you fail all 3, then you must take the course again.
You must take the refresher course again?
Whichever course you've
Okay.
embarked on.
Okay. So if you fail your qualification at the refresher level.
Let's go back to the refresher.
And I'm gonna say we're also needing to discuss because of the emergency suspension. So are we talking about new applicants or?
We're talking about yes, this is the person who's eligible. It's their first time applying for the private security. And we're letting them use their eligible prior law enforcement experience. They're taking the armed refresher, the exam, and the qualification. They pass the exam, but they've failed the qualification. What happens? You've already said if you fail the exam, we're going to send you all the way back to the 24 hours of basic training. What happens if you pass the exam but fail the qualification?
Can they redo just the firearms portion?
After the 3 attempts and failed?
Yeah, if they can't shoot, can they go through just the firearms portion since they passed the other test?
So the current rule states 3 attempts in 1 day. And then that's a failure. So it would be whatever this group is going to discuss goes beyond that. And then I would also throw in the mix of safety violations as well. And not just a fail to call. Steve?
I believe that they fail the qualification 3 times through in a single day. They would have to retake the firearms portion over again.
Meaning the 24-hour basic course?
Yes.
Okay. And then Mike Brandt?
I think if you fail the firearms 3 times in 1 day, it shows there's an issue there. I think at that point, I would think that you would be able to come back and take the refresher one more time, because it's not the classroom part that you're failing, it's the firearm part. And I think if you fail the firearm part the second time, the second day, then there needs to be like a time frame before you're even allowed to try to renew. Because at that point you're going to need range time. You can't just keep coming every, day after day after day trying to take the requal. You're going to have range time before you're allowed to try to qual again. And it's interesting you brought up the safety issue. I think if you fail due to a safety issue, then you take the 24-hour course period.
I'm just gonna throw this out there. It sounds like you're gonna make the standard a little higher for these individuals.
If you fail the safety section, yes, absolutely.
Crystal, for the record, so there's a difference between the safe gun handling test and causing a safety violation during the qualification. So I want to be clear on what part you're saying, if it applies to all of it, or you mentioned the safe gun handling. But that's one portion of that test. There could be safety violations during the qualification.
It's a safety violations during the qualification, the handling actually of a firearm that I believe would result in an immediate 24-hour class.
Thank you.
Eric Knopp, so I guess just a question on enforcement, I suppose. Thinking of since I am an instructor, are the instructors going to know whether or not the student in their class is meeting these exemptions and have to be held to a different standard? Like, how would an instructor find that out without a student disclosing? So this is my concern, as an instructor, but also as someone who's setting a rule book. If we have a bunch of things that are deviating, or I believe as Carissa said, holding them to a higher standard than what the existing standard is, then you're just going to wind up tripping up instructors who are trying to do the right thing and don't realize they have someone in their class who's exempt or needs to be held to a higher standard.
We did speak to that a little bit in the last meeting, that there are going to be things that the department needs to talk about procedurally, how we would handle that on the forefront of those new applicants. And we haven't devoted any time for any of that discussion yet. But it's a
Sure.
great reminder. Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. We're getting close to the close of our scheduled time. I do want to honor that. Let's do quick comments from Stephen and then Mike.
I didn't need to make any comment. Apparently my hand is still
Okay.
raised.
No problem. Mike, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, in kind of a quick response to Eric, I agree there is a possibility of tripping an instructor up in the fact that maybe he didn't know there was a violation by another instructor, a day or two ahead of time. I think that's where DPSST comes in. I think the instructor goes ahead and sends through the failed PS6, and then the DPSST can do an emergency suspension.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Any other last quick comments to put with that?
This is Krista. I just have a quick comment on having a higher standard logistically or administratively. Eric can see that would cause complications. However, I think that because of their work history, experience history, it does seem appropriate to have a slightly higher standard if you are giving them a bunch of time back, basically.
Pass.
Right.
You gotta be up here.
Yeah.
So what I don't want to do is rush this decision, because we're not done with our work group discussions but by any means. The last thing that we want to talk about today is potentials for scheduling our next meeting. And we do have a few other questions and topics to carry over, as well as we'll eventually want to bring some draft administrative rules to you all to kind of outline the recommendations and discussions you've had and confirm that those draft administrative rules reflect those recommendations before it's all a final package. So we do have at least one more, if not two more meetings ahead of us. I'm going to let Susie talk about potential timelines. So we'll carry over the discussion on the firearms qualification and recap and decide on the consensus for that in the next meeting.
So I had a couple potential dates in mind, but before I release those dates, I wanted to check with folks, because one of the weeks I was looking at was the week of the Veterans Day holiday, and I was thinking I probably will just skip over that one just because it is like in the middle, and I think you're out later that week. Okay. So we're going to be looking at the week of November 17th. So if everybody could kind of check their calendars there. And I was looking at, hang on a second. Yes, I was looking at the Friday, but I was curious if Fridays are bad for folks.
That Friday would not work for me.
November 17th works for Larry Welty.
We're talking about
Days.
Friday I'm sorry. Were we talking about Friday the 21st?
Yes, I was originally.
That is the Friday before the week of Thanksgiving.
Okay. All right. So maybe I'll
This
just
is-
throw some dates.
Fridays
This
are
is
really...
Tom.
Sorry, go ahead,
This
Tom.
is Tom. Fridays are tough for me as well too. It's middle,
Okay.
beginning of the week works a lot better.
Okay.
Friday
So I think
is-
what I'll do is I'll just send out an email after this. So we don't have to take all the time of everybody looking at their calendars. And no, I appreciate everyone being here for the last meeting and this meeting. It shows to me that this is very important to you. So hopefully we can get a date that again works for everyone. I think we missed one person today and one person last week. And so hopefully we can get everybody together because it is important and we have a little bit bigger conversation to finalize this. And again, as Jen said, needing some time to get some rules created. So with holidays coming and whatnot, I'll send you an email and we'll get a date for everyone here.
Works for me.
And again, attend on Teams if that's doable for you or in person.
I will say that Mondays and Fridays are really tough for me because that's the beginning of my week and the end of my week in the office. And both days I'm busy.
That's pretty much the same for everybody. We try not to schedule meetings on Mondays and Fridays just for that reason. People forget it's on Monday and people are leaving on Friday. So it'll most likely be a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you all again so much.
Yes, we appreciate it so much. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.